Hello and welcome to the Week Old Beans podcast, episode 20. It's been going for quite some time. I am Fowler, and my co-host is Ardot. And the YouTube algorithm likes things that are light, that are fun, that are entertaining. So for our next video, we're going to be talking about the Israel-Palestine debacle. So,
Yeah,
anyways, I'm gonna hand it off to Ardot, who is the resident Israel expert among us.
I wouldn't say that, but I appreciate you. I appreciate your confidence in me.
It's not an exaggeration to say that Ardot knows more about the history and state of Israel than any human being who has ever lived.
Yeah, definitely, that is a true statement. Definitely, definitely something that is big if true. Uh, but no. So the word debacle, I think, is a little bit light. I think clusterfuck is a better descriptor of what's actually going on over there right now. All in
A
such a
massacre.
yeah, clusterfuck. Just like the cluster bombs that are being dropped on innocent people in Palestine. It's
Bro, too soon. Too
yeah,
soon.
yeah. It's too fucking soon. All this happening because the quickness of which it happened. I think is astounding. I mean, I just happened to look at my news feed and then it was like, oh, bombs, and I'm like, oh shit, and it's just escalated since then, and
Well,
it's
we don't we won't be able to know until a little later, I think. But I know that the Wall Street Journal reported that potentially uh like Iran might be involved. Like we're not going to know who helped the attack like happen. But I would be very surprised if the Palestinians alone did it.
yeah, it's we're not going to know for a long time um the true extent of what happened. The actual conflict itself is multifaceted. The history of the conflict is multifaceted. It's incredibly nuanced, and honest to God, we are not going to be able to touch upon every little intrinsic detail in the 40 minutes that we do that we do this podcast. And the other thing is, like, there are wildly different perspectives from respected academics, politicians, activists on this issue. So I want to preface this because Fowler and I were both, we were like, well, we didn't speak about it when it happened, because I think the day that we filmed last week's podcast was when it all started, last Friday. And we didn't speak
Yeah.
on it in the until the very end. We didn't speak on it, and that was in large part because we wanted to see how it would develop. Because as we found out with the Russian coup, shit pops off in the news, and then turns out, it could have just been, BS. But this is not that. This is like very bad. And the media firestorm, at least over here in the West, has been fucking crazy. So there's the actual conflict, and then there's the response to the conflict, and the way the media has you know I don't want to say spun the conflict, but the media response to the conflict, which is very, I think, firmly on the side of Israel in this. There have been numerous condemnations of, members of Congress who have made statements in support of Palestine. There have been protests, both pro-Israel
We might
and.
be burying the lead a little bit, though. We need to
Hey,
describe the
shut
context
up!
first.
Let me speak. All right, calm down. I'm getting to it. All right. If you want to speak, you gotta speak up. Okay, you gotta say something
I'm just
relevant.
saying we have not
I think the
formally
people
introduced
watching,
the
I
two
think the
fields.
people watching know what the fuck's happening, considering the fact that it's been the only thing on the news for the past like 7 days. So I mean, I'm assuming if y'all are watching this podcast, if you're in tune with politics, so you know what's happening. I'll go over it. I'm not gonna just leave y'all in the dark about it, but calm down, feller. Okay. Let a woman, don't interrupt a woman while she's talking. Okay, it's very misogynistic of you. It's not very woke of you. Uh,
How dare you assume my gender? That was fucked up.
yeah, yeah. Um, but oh, what was I saying? Oh fuck. Oh my god. Oh yes. Okay. So media firestorm, clusterfuck, protest. This is part of what I'm describing here because this is all important. Various protests, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, in both the United States and the United Kingdom. Online left-wing activists like far left activists making dumb tweets in support of Hamas, which is dumb, and they're dumb, and Hamas is dumb.
And we need to preface that, like, we might cover the left Twitter backlash a little bit, but like we have to make it clear to be responsible that that is like a tiny amount of the actual population.
Yes.
Like, most people are problematically pro-Israel. The, like, pro-Hamas people are very much like an online phenomenon that has no real power outside of
Uh,
like very specific spaces.
yes. It is important in the context of what you want the left wing movement to be, right? Because I would make the
Mhm.
argument that like broad left wing outside of the internet is pro Palestine. To what degree they are pro Hamas, I don't know. I don't know. I can't speak to that because I don't know. But so we'll start off with the conflict. Fowler. I'm gonna do what you just told me to do and actually give an overview of the conflict. So I guess I can give a short timeline of what happened. Um,
We're better off breaking down the Hamas attack first and then breaking down the Israeli response, or do you think we're better off summarizing them together and then explaining them together?
I mean, I can very briefly just give a timestamp. You had I think it was last Friday. You had the initial attacks by Hamas, kind of unprovoked and unforeseen by Israel. Attacks at a music festival that killed about 700 people, including several Americans and several other members of international countries, the UK, Germany. Um, that attack, as well as the rockets that were launched by Hamas from the Gaza Strip, left another couple hundred people dead. Israel retaliated with rocket launches that left more Gazans and Palestinians dead. Um, you have breakthroughs from Hamas into Israeli territory. I mean, from what I read, it just seemed like indiscriminate killing. There wasn't really a specific target they were going after. It wasn't like they were going, to Netanyahu's palace or whatever, or the presidential palace, and concentrating their efforts there. It really just seemed like indiscriminate killing by Hamas. Um,
And there are, and there, to be clear, the reason this is such a big deal is Hamas has and will continue to attack Israel all the time with rockets. They have an intricate network of tunnels that they use to sneak into Israel and kill and kidnap people. But this was an invasion like Israel's never seen. The
yes,
Hamas got fighters. They came through the air using gliders. They came from the sea. They came from the land. Like, it was an attack on all
they
fronts,
took
and it
hostages as
was it is
well.
the high. They took hostages. They indiscriminately killed people door to door. They killed children. They killed women. They it is we the number I think is 1,000 right now. It's probably larger, but this is the most, like, Jewish citizens that have been killed since the Holocaust. It was an enormous and like unprecedented attack.
From what I read, something that the Iron Dome that Israel installed, which is, for those of you who don't know, the Iron Dome, it was pretty much gifted to Israel by the United States. It is a anti-missile device that has protected Israel from various rocket assaults by Hamas, and it failed, from what I read, or it didn't do enough um, to protect Israel from Hamas's rocket launches. Um, you know, um, so that's also something that occurred. Um, so all in all, just a clusterfuck. I mean, I'm not trying to even be funny. That upon my own personal analysis of the situation, it's a clusterfuck. There are Americans captured in the Gaza Strip. I think right now the number is 14 Americans dead or captured. There are more, I'm sure. There are,
Mhm.
I think, 150 hostages were taken by Hamas. Again, these are very loose numbers. That are loose numbers that are constantly changing. Fowler, before we started, I told Fowler before we started, the most recent number that I saw was 3,000 dead thus far. Both in Gaza and just across Israel. Um, so I guess we could get into some analysis of the history I mean, I don't know how much do you think it would be worth to go over the history of Israel and Palestine, because I feel like that is, you know, a very
In the
important part of.
analysis, because a lot of our analysis is going to be the history. Let's start with the attacks, and then we can
Well, I meant
branch
his.
out from there to explain them.
Yeah, well, I meant like history of Israel and like why shit is always popping off over there. Do you want me to go over
Yeah,
that real
okay.
quickly? Okay. Not just
Yeah,
like the
let's do
history of
that.
these attacks, but the actual history of Israel. I'll give a Cliff Notes version. Um to make it light to just, make a long story short, it's England's fault. As is everything. It's the fault of the United Kingdom. Uh so um oh shit, hang on. Israel basically, um I guess we can start with 1918. Uh, a group called the Jewish Legion, a group of Zionist volunteers, assisted the British conquest of Palestine. In 1920, after the Allies conquered the Levant during World War One, the territory, which encompasses Palestine, Israel, the kind of modern territory that we know of as Israel, was divided by the French and the British. Um, and so Jewish people began settling in the region as early as 1920.
We
Um,
should also preface like why the Israeli home state was such an important idea was because in the aftermath of the Holocaust, when the Nazis killed all those millions of Jews, the Jewish people were very paranoid about the idea of like another Holocaust happening, that they couldn't trust non-Jewish governments to protect Jewish interests and not do something like that again. So the like the Ardot's going through like the timeline, but it's important to remember that like the impetus of it, the reason why a lot of the Jews were so intent to make Israel, it's not just because the land that Israel is on, like parts of it are holy land to the Israelis. It was also that they felt after the aftermath of the Holocaust, they needed to basically create their own territory so they could protect themselves from genocide.
yes, Jewish people historically have been nomadic throughout most of history. There's never really been a Jewish state because the nature of Judaism has not really required one. This is part of why anti-Semitism is so prevalent, right? It's because Jewish people historically have lived in many parts of the world because they're nomads, or historically they were nomadic. So there's, you can find Jewish people in pretty much every Western country you go to, as well as parts of the Middle East, as well as parts of, South America, and parts of Africa as well. And, so they're an easy minority. They're also, they don't try to convert you to Judaism. They didn't send out, converts in the ways that like Christians and, Muslims did. They don't want converts. They're relatively private with their religion, and so they're not they just are not as open in ways, maybe not even open, because openness doesn't really. I mean, openness sometimes isn't a good thing. Keeping things private can sometimes be better, but uh, the all of these factors lead anti-Semitism to be and then they have also occupied in Europe, at least, occupied the trades that were undesirable to Christians originally, because Christians didn't want to deal with they didn't want to deal with money, so they let Jewish people deal with the money, and as it turns out, dealing with money makes you money.
But the
Handling money.
complication is that, oh, sorry, the complication is that the Holy Land that the Jews wanted, that would become Israel,
Wait, I wasn't done with
that,
my point.
sorry.
All in all, God, you are just. Is it like the misogyny inside of you just bubbling up because we're doing the 20th
It
episode?
might have been the Red Bull.
Yeah,
It
it's
might
the
have been
Red
the Red
Bull.
Bull
You
I
drank
had.
a fucking you snorted Mountain Dew juice beforehand, and you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna interrupt women. I'm kidding. Fowler, I love you dearly.
I interrupt men too,
Yeah, you
okay?
interrupt. You're an
Brian knows
equal.
that. Shout out to Brian.
You're an equal opportunity interrupter. I appreciate that about you. Uh, um,
Sorry, keep going.
no, I was gonna. I was.
I'm very nervous. I'm very nervous about this podcast because it is an incredibly complicated issue, definitely the most serious thing that we've talked about. And I am a little paranoid about properly framing
It's okay. Well, I was just gonna say, I was making a point to say that, like, to explain, to why anti-Semitism is a really useful tool for people in power, because of the um, because of the way Judaism and Jewish people have been framed historically. So um, and I say this because anti-Semitism is a very serious issue in the United States and across the world. It is the numbers out of the United States about the levels of anti-Semitism that we have here are absolutely abysmally horrible, and it's gotten worse since this conflict, and it will probably increasingly get worse. But I just wanted to make a note of that because I think that's a really important thing to understand. That um, in relation to the creation of Israel in the Middle East, like, there's a reason why Jewish people have been an easy scapegoat for leaders for hundreds and hundreds of years, and also, it's the reason why that paranoia, that inability to trust non-Jewish governments exists. It's not an irrational fear, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of trying to validate your point, Fowler, about why that is.
Yeah. But the problem is that the Holy Land isn't just holy to the Jews, and Israel isn't just land that was promised to the Jews by Britain. The Palestinians were also promised the land by Britain, by other powers, and they also view parts of Israel as holy land to Islam. So it's a lot of fuckery, but essentially the European powers promised Israel and Palestine, or sorry, the Jews and the Palestinians, that Israel would be their territory and their homeland to protect their people, which kind of leads to the conflict of today.
Yeah. Shout out to the British for being top negotiators. They've never made a bad deal. They have always followed through on their negotiations. I'm sure if you go down and talk to the Rhodesians, that they'll tell you that everything's peachy keen with the British and their fantastic negotiational skills. But that's for another
Yeah.
podcast. That's for another podcast.
John Oliver said it best that most mistakes in history can be pointed to a mustachioed British man drawing a straight line where he shouldn't and saying you'll all have to live with it.
Yep. If you hear me swallowing, it's because I'm drinking raspberry tea. Very good. That's the tea of the day. Maybe I'll do a tea of the day every podcast. So that's a little bit of backstory. I mean, just to finish up, the British basically fucked the area, and they gave Israel to they made Israel essentially a Jewish homeland, and I think the policy is, like, if you are of Jewish ancestry wherever you live outside of Israel, you can move to Israel, and I think you're supposed to make a trip to Israel. I have friends who are Jewish who have done their trips to Israel. If you live, in the United States or Europe, you're supposed to at least once make a trip to Israel. For any Jewish people listening, I apologize if I've mischaracterized that, but and I don't know the name of that particular practice, but that is what I've heard. So, so yeah, Israel, effectively is I would argue, a Jewish ethno-state. And it's an ethno-state that, had a lot of validity in its creation. And I guess I'm sure there are people that make the argument that, a Jewish ethno-state is necessary today, considering the high levels of anti-Semitism that exist. And so, but the issue lies with, the people that lived there prior to the creation of the Israeli state. The Palestinians that lived in the Gaza Strip and across Israel, who were effectively pushed out slowly from their lands. And so, it creates this fucked situation, right? And it's a fucked situation that I don't really know how it can be resolved. Like, it's the one geopolitical nightmare that I look at and I'm like, I see no resolve that is going to occur, that is going to lead to sort of peaceful swaths or a peace, blanketing the land. I think, it's just the Palestinian people. They don't have enough. They're not large enough in number. Number one, and number two, they don't have enough territory. The Gaza Strip is a mess. Hamas, uh, which makes up one of the two parties of Palestine, the other being the Fatah party, which is the more nonviolent, sort of peaceful party. They were pushed out of power. Um,
And
in
pushed off of buildings, a lot of them.
Yes, yeah, also thrown off buildings. But they were pushed out of power damn near 20 years ago by Hamas, and Hamas has essentially just been acting as I would argue, jihadist terrorist ever since then.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's a very complicated situation of Hamas. Hamas are the ones who did the attack on Israel that claimed so many lives, and they are explicitly a terrorist organization. In the Hamas charter, they say explicitly that one of their goals is the eradication of the Jews. So they are, you know, they are an extremely dangerous and fanatical group in this story.
yeah, Hamas is not good, guys. Hamas not the best. Uh, and
They are the far right party that basically, like, Fatwa is I mean, I guess they're political moderates for Palestine, but like Hamas, they are overtly jihadist. They are overtly anti-democracy. They are overtly anti-Semitic. They are an extreme and authoritarian regime that currently controls um, Palestine, and Hamas have like increased the amount of attacks on Israel and the Jews, and they have been they attack civilians. They like set up their military headquarters in hospitals and things like that. Like they're monstrous.
yeah, Hamas, bad hombres, most definitely. You know they present a huge problem for any sort of advancement towards Palestinian freedom and social justice. I mean, I don't think the existence of Hamas guarantees, the subjugation and destruction of Palestine. They are not in it for negotiation or like real, tangible, realistic solutions. Uh, they want the eradication of Israel. They will not settle for anything less than that. And as as we've seen with Western powers dumping millions of dollars, and the United States in particular dumping millions of dollars into Israel to support them and uh, again support them against Hamas, and also to act as essentially the largest military base in the Middle East, which is why we invest in Israel. It's not because we really love Jewish people, by the way. Let me tell y'all who are listening. It is not because the United States government just really loves Jewish people. It's because uh, Israel provides a fantastic tactical advantage in the Middle East for the United States Armed Forces and for the United States government.
Mm-hmm.
So like for better or for worse, the U.S. government and the U.S. military needs Israel to function because it's one of the only countries in the Middle East that is not hostile to Western powers. Um, so it's just, I probably, this is not very intelligent analysis, but I mean, I just, what do you think, Fowler? It's just not good.
Well, I think there's one more variable that we have to add to this before we can really dig into the analysis. Um, Israel has there was a point where the Labor Party in Israel was actually fairly progressive, and also were interested in cutting a deal with the Palestinians in order to have peaceful land. But that time has passed. The Israeli government is incredibly far right, and it's led by Netanyahu, who is um, an incredibly dark figure. He's kind of an authoritarian who's been battling the courts. He has a lot of corruption, and he has very deliberately intensified the conflict and made it worse in order to solidify his own power through the fear of the Palestinians and Hamas. And so this isn't a situation where like one of the governments is seeking peace or something like that. It's very much a situation in which everyone involved is, doing incredibly toxic things to intensify the conflict for their own self-perceived advantage.
Yeah, it's a rare example of where both sides are fucking crazy. Netanyahu and his camp, he has deliberately exacerbated the tension. Um, every rocket that Hamas launches uh, further solidifies his claims to launching rockets back that hurt innocent people. And vice versa. Hamas has, only intensified the conflict through their unwillingness to sort of accept the dim, disappointing, but just reality that, like, there is not going to be a Palestinian state from sea to shining sea. It's not happening. The West will not let it happen. Israel will not let it happen. Just that dream that maybe was possible at the very beginning of the Israeli occupation. Like maybe, but just in 2023, like that's just not going to happen at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's both sides are fucking up, but the party that has the responsibility to end this conflict is Israel because they are the party with all the guns and all the power. But as Fowler just said, like, what do you do if both parties are unwilling? You know what I mean? Like, what do you do if one party is just not willing to take that step to push for ceasefire and push for peace?
Yeah, of course. And I think the problem is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and a cycle. Like the Israelis, I mean, they're occupying Palestine. They've created an open air prison. It's an apartheid state. They drop bombs on the people. They steal their land, and so they create the incentives for the Palestinians to lash out with missiles of their own, with attacks of their own, which in turn strengthens the Israeli anger. It's a constant cycle, and this incredibly vicious attack by Hamas and then that subsequent invasion by Israel is just like the continuation of that cycle to even more deadly ends than usual.
I think what's so different about this is, we've all been probably watching what's going on. And, from the journalist that was killed, I think it was last year, Palestinian journalist that was killed by Israeli forces. Every time it's been, kind of little things, to, the Palestinian protesters that have been killed by Israeli forces, men, women, and children. Um, it's all been these sort of incremental steps to what I think is the penultimate, conclusion to this, which is the all-out war. And Israel and Palestine have had wars before. This is not something that is just completely new, but the level of intensity from the Israeli government towards the Gaza Strip makes me think that we are kind of in the end game here. I think yesterday, the Israeli government ordered 1 million people to evacuate from northern Gaza, which the UN said was basically impossible. I mean, 1 million people, that's a fuck ton of people, to evacuate from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. Um, and, the UN, they were like, well, this is like, like getting 1 million people out of the Gaza Strip to southern Gaza, when they've cut off all food, electricity, power. I mean, it's essentially just like anarchy. I would imagine, at this point. I mean, and I'm sure I just would have to guess that when all those Palestinians are evacuated, they'll just claim the sort of unoccupied uh, parts of northern Gaza. They'll sweep through and just, take out any Hamas militants that are there and just continue to push the Palestinians, tighter and tighter and tighter together.
And this is also important to note that this is the explicit mission of the Israelis in their attack, their counterattack. I forget who, but a high-ranking member, I think he was the Secretary of Defense in Israel, he explicitly said that like the that like their enemies are human animals, and sort of that rhetoric of just extreme antagonism and like a willingness to really do war crimes is what we're talking about.
Yeah, openly as well. And it's just all very sad. It's just very sad. I mean, I guess that's the deepest emotion I can express. It's just um the paranoia and the willingness, and I mean, I've said this before. Like, I also try to keep in perspective the fact that Israel is a state that is surrounded by hostile powers. I mean, Jordanians, or is it Lebanese? Is it Lebanon? I think it's Lebanon. In Lebanon to the north,
Mhm.
um, Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel, and I don't know if that's going to lead to a broader conflict with Jordan. I think Jordan has had, or I'm sorry, Lebanon. Lebanon and Israel have had conflicts in the past. Um, but
One of the
Israel,
reasons that Israel is so militant is that they are. It's not just that the Hamas are trying to eliminate them, but Israel is surrounded in on all sides by Muslim majority countries that are explicitly anti-Semitic and have in the past attacked Israel. So there is like that concern of like they can't really lose and move somewhere else because they're in a situation where they're surrounded on all sides by their enemies.
yeah, it's definitely like, um, I try to keep that into perspective too, not to justify the war crimes, obviously, but to sort of, I think for Americans, it's very easy for us to look at that and say like, oh, like, like, why do they need to be paranoid? Like, why do they need to be scared? Well, we don't have to worry about being invaded by Mexico or Canada. Like, we're pretty chill here in the United States. We got friendly relations with the Canadians, even if our relationship with Mexico is fraught. I mean, Mexico is not sending its military to take back Texas anytime soon. They're not doing that.
Yeah,
We are protected. Even South American countries are not going to do that. We are protected by just our borders, and it's just not something Americans have ever really had to worry about. You know, uh, um,
but instead
so
of all that, the Israeli occupation of or the Israeli like apartheid state that they've created in Palestine and shutting off their electricity and food, which and water, which they're doing in response to the attack, them escalating and taking more territory. They have created the seeds that allowed resentment that allowed Hamas to take power in the first place.
yes,
They have created an untenable situation by placing the Palestinians in such poverty and powerlessness and desperation that they have turned increasingly to groups like Hamas in order to try and fix their situation.
the same could be said, I
Which,
would argue, in, like, Afghanistan and Iraq with the creation of, like, the Taliban or the ISIS. It's the same attitudes um, that lead to the creation of groups like ISIS. And these groups only become more and more extreme as material conditions worsen in those countries. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but I'll give a really brief example. Like, Al Qaeda, the official policy of Al Qaeda was relatively tame in comparison to the official policy of ISIS. I mean, Al Qaeda was, they believed in economy, they believed in commerce, they understood that, like, yes, we might not like selling poppy seeds, but if we're going to have a functioning state, there has to be some sort of economic outsource that makes us money. ISIS burned poppy seed fields despite the wealth that poppy seeds brought. I mean, they are they were 5, 6, 7 times more fanatical than Al Qaeda, and it's because a core tenet of ISIS's belief is in, like, the end times. I mean, Al Qaeda's policy was against Western aggression and sort of, the Western powers meddling in the in Islamic states, whereas ISIS is more, literally like doomsday, Allah will return type shit. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, when Al Qaeda fell, as the Iraq and Afghanistan wars progressed, the material conditions for people living in those countries got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until eventually Iraq became a failed state. I mean, it's uh, and the the attitudes just became more crazy, because and the same could be said probably in Palestine. It's you had the Fatah party, which was probably a lot more level and a lot more practical, but then from there, Hamas swept the polls and took power as the Palestinian people became more and more desperate for someone who was going to actually make change.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Um,
A lot of imperialist actions and interference by the West has created a lot of the problems in the Middle East. And I don't mean this in an anti-American way or a dumb anti-American way, but like if you look at the history, a lot of the Middle East was colonized and controlled, was deliberately destabilized by Western powers in order to get things like gold and oil. And
our policies
America,
towards the Middle East are not, we don't, our policies do not foster democracy. They don't foster sort of, they foster economic exchange, oil and precious minerals and other material pieces of wealth. I mean, this is the same in
and
Africa as well.
explicitly for design. It's like
Yes.
the point of them is to destabilize the countries, which I think is important. Like it's not an accident that a lot of these countries are as unstable as they are, and we can see that in South America as well.
Yeah, South America and also I would argue Africa, although that's more because of Europe. It's um, it is by design, and as the world becomes more chaotic, as climate change becomes a bigger and bigger threat, I think that's going to be that's going to be just a disaster in the Middle East. I mean, like there are reports that the Middle East in 50 years is going to be uninhabitable. Um, like Israel as a state will not be inhabitable in 50 years due to climate change. So one can only imagine how much worse this conflict is going to be. Uh, and when the land itself becomes unable to support human life. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
um, so, I mean, this is kind of a doomer episode. We're at the 40-minute mark about to be, so we might need to wrap it up in like 5 minutes. But we can
Okay, no
continue.
worries.
I want to end on a positive note, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. We'll have to watch the conflict. I mean, maybe some miracle will happen, and you know, Hamas will be like, well, this was not based, and they'll pull back. But I even think then it's probably too late.
I don't think Hamas is I don't think that they benefit. Like they are a far extremist group that survives off of the hatred of the Palestinians against the Israeli Jews. I think they are not remotely interested in anything that could plausibly help anyone. Like I'm very cynical. They will continue to stoke fear and outrage. They will continue to do attacks. They will continue to provoke the Israeli Jews into attacking um, civilians and like spread that hatred. They are not the solution. Like the Hamas is not going to be a part of any sort of peace treaty or anything of that sort. They have to be pushed out of power, but that will be very difficult to do. And I'm sure that as the Israeli occupation continues, as they stop the Palestinians in from getting like basic necessities and they bomb their buildings and they invade, this is only going to bring more people into Hamas's arms.
Yeah, it's yeah. So we'll follow the conflict, on this podcast. We might not do whole episodes about it, but this definitely is something that's been dominating the news. Real quickly before we go, some other things that have dominated the news. Steve Scalise was nominated for Speaker. He had enough votes, I think, to be speaker, and then he's dropped out. So the speakership is still vacant as of today. Uh, what else has happened? Oh, um, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks announcing his run for the presidency. Um,
we're never going to cover this.
We're not going to. Yeah, well, I'm going to just go through it. Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks announcing his presidency. A lot of logistical issues there because Cenk Uygur was not born in the United States. Per the Constitution, one must be a natural-born citizen of the United States of America. Cenk has said he will challenge this in the Supreme Court or challenge this in the court of law if he gets close enough to the presidency, which he probably will not. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the former Democratic candidate, he has announced his change from the Democratic Party to the Independent Party. How this will affect the 2024 election. I mean, I've seen people say that he's pulling votes from Trump. I've seen people say that he could potentially pull votes from, pull moderate and independent votes from Biden. Who the fuck knows? So those are kind of the three big stories of this week that occurred. And we probably won't go over all of those in next week's podcast because it's just they're more menial, I guess. But do you have any closing thoughts, Fowler? I know you told me not to ask you closing thoughts, but I'm going to ask you closing thoughts because you told me explicitly not to do that.
I think it's really important, and we talked about this a little bit when we discussed demagoguery, I think, of the Tucker Carlson episode. But like, if you are seeing messaging about different groups of people being the enemy, I think people need to be very careful about thinking about like what are the reasons that like messaging is being pushed, like which groups benefit from that fear or that divisiveness or that anger. And sometimes divisiveness is acceptable or even necessary. There are times when there truly are divisions and there are certain people who are to blame, but you should always be careful about thinking about who benefits and who doesn't from that sort of rhetoric.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely think that is true. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot with the migrant situation that's going on in New York and Chicago. I've been thinking long and hard about that because that is a very, very difficult topic to discuss. So, and always whenever you read something on the internet, think about look at the way it's framed. Read the way that it's framed. Read the sources. Read multiple sources, and understand that try to understand the overarching narrative. Uh, you know, um, a really good example of this, I think, just to close out, is I remember a couple years ago, California banned plastic bags, right? They banned the sale of plastic bags or the use of plastic bags in grocery stores across the state. And when that happened, the media went buck wild. I mean, they were saying, Gavin Newsom, the communist, California, the communist state, you can't even get plastic bags in California anymore. This is socialism. This is bad. This is going to collapse the economy. This is going to destroy, grocery stores in California. They're all going to leave. There was this whole media firestorm. The law passed. I think either plastic bags were completely banned or they were severely limited. And so far, California's grocery store community, maybe not in San Francisco, but that's a different story. But overall, California's grocery store community has been doing just fine. The entire media outrage was manufactured. There was a specific narrative behind it. I would imagine fucking probably paid for by the damn grocery store companies or whatever. But but I remember that, and that sticks in my head because I'm like, wow, that nothing happened, literally nothing. These stores didn't lose money. In fact, they gained some money because you had to buy, the dollar reusable bags. The industry did not collapse. People did not starve to death because they couldn't buy groceries. They just got rid of single-use plastic, and which is good. because we have too much of that. The benefits of getting rid of single-use plastic far outweigh the possible slight dip in sales, which I don't even think there was a dip in sales, like I said, the grocery stores might have to take. But always think about the overarching narrative. I've been thinking about that a lot with the migrant situation going on in New York City, and not just the overarching narrative, but, like, is this a time to panic or is it not? Is there something, potentially, dangerous and about the way the migrant situation is being handled in New York and Chicago, or is it just all smoke and mirrors from the media? I don't really know. But always keep an eye out on that. Maybe we'll do an episode on that. I don't know. It's up to Fowler. You get to choose the next topic, Fowler.
Well, we might be forced to do the speakership race, or
Oh God, the most boring topic in the world. Jesus
What do you
Christ.
mean? It was extremely exciting. I've been enjoying
No,
the
it's
debate.
not. What has they were like
Practicing
Steve?
the
They're
Super Bowl,
literally
so.
the GOP was like Steve Scalise, and Steve was like nope, and then like that's yeah. Um. Uh. Which potential crypto fascist gets to be the next leader of Congress? I'm really excited about that. But yeah, that's it for this week's episode. I'm doing a lot with the channel, y'all. I'm trying to get our analytics, finagle the algorithm, get our views up, and potentially start streaming soon. I'm hooking up things, trying to get that all worked out. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'm R Dot, and this is my host. Say your name.
I am Fowler.
All right, I am Fowler. I'm R Dot, and this is your host. I am Fowler, and we will see you guys in the next podcast.